News at 10 learned today that the official French report on the car crash which killed Diana, Princess of Wales, is expected to be finished this summer. That's quicker than usual in France, and a senior detective today criticised the effort and manpower put into the inquiry. Since the early stunning reports of a chase by paparazzi photographers, then that Diana's driver was drunk and speeding, there's been little hard information. Our Europe correspondent, Bill Neely, was in Paris hours after the crash and has this special report on the progress of the inquiry.
On the banks of the River Seine, some of Paris's top detectives are troubled. They're under great pressure to find an old white car driven by a middle-aged man with a large dog. A car that may have caused the Mercedes in which the Princess of Wales was travelling to swerve and crash. At the scene of the crash, they had found fragments of a car's rear light. Piece by piece, they rebuilt the light of a Fiat Uno. Using other lights, they dated the car to at least 9 years old. The Princess's Mercedes had paint marks along one side, white marks. They traced the records of 40,000 white Fiat Unos in the Paris area, and one by one, they've been examining them. Hoping too to find the driver and his dog, who eyewitnesses say drove slowly into the tunnel moments before the crash. It has been a massive search involving hundreds of officers, thousands of man-hours. Some detectives now say too many officers and too many hours. It's not worth it.
Un accident de la route n'est pas du ressort de la brigade criminelle.
It's a road accident, says this officer. Criminal detectives should stick to crimes. Here at the very heart of the inquiry, just off this corridor, the chief investigator, a magistrate, is now directing around 20 police officers, including 6 senior detectives. He has already gathered more than 20,000 pages of statements, reports and information. And yet after nearly 5 months, neither the magistrate nor a single detective has ever spoken publicly about the case. Most of them have never been seen. No interviews, no appeals for information, no interim report, just silence. This senior magistrate says justice is not being seen to be done.
There is a real problem when justice is not understood. We have our own rules, but we have to explain which are our rules. And I think there is a lack of explanation.
And the rule is extreme secrecy. So, for example, Diana's Mercedes is kept under heavy guard at this military base. Detectives have spoken 3 times to Trevor Rees-Jones, the only survivor. He doesn't remember a slow white Fiat Uno or very much else. Serge Arnal is one of the 9 photographers already charged with manslaughter. He was back at work this week. None of them believe they'll go to trial.
No way. I don't think.
Why not?
Because for me it's obvious that none of them will go to any trial.
But one judicial source told me 2 or 3 of the photographers are likely to be tried for failing to assist at the scene of the accident, and that the final report will be ready by the summer. Diana still graces the front pages of this week's French magazines. There are still tears and flowers at the scene of her death, and there is still a long way to go in the inquiry into the world's most notorious car crash. Bill Neely, News at 10, Paris.
And finally, a remarkable game of...
He's done nothing wrong. Mr. Hamilton says he should resign. Our political correspondent Hugh Pym reports.
The anti-sleaze campaigner Martin Bell, in his trademark white suit, was out early this morning. He was facing questions about his own conduct in the election. Crucially, should he have declared a £9,000 bill for legal advice under the rules governing spending by candidates?
The advice came from the 2 parties that stood their candidates down. I now know it was paid for. I didn't know that until 2 days ago. And it's not traditionally or normally an election expense.
But his old adversaries, Christine and Neil Hamilton, weren't exactly slow off the mark in accusing Mr. Bell of hypocrisy.
At the same time, he was accusing me of covering things up. He was being bankrolled by the Labour Party and the Liberal Party whilst pretending to be an independent and denying that he was receiving any donations of more than £100.
Mr Bell says that legal spending was not used to promote his electoral battle with Neil Hamilton. Lawyers say technically he's correct.
If that's the case, then those aren't election expenses. But where there's any doubt, it just seems to be common sense to declare them.
But for Martin Bell, there is another potentially embarrassing aspect to all this. He's a member of the Commons Standards and Privileges Committee, which is about to investigate the question of which election expenses MPs should register. And a spokesman for the parliamentary watchdog, Sir Gordon Downey, said if there was a complaint about Mr Bell's conduct, it would be looked into. Hugh Pym, ITN, Westminster.
The former South African President P.W. Botha was defiant today when he appeared in court for refusing to testify at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Mr Botha, the last hardline apartheid leader, said he had nothing to apologise for. "I only apologise for my sins before God," he said. Here's our Africa correspondent, Tim Ewart.
Here in the Southern Cape, the old South Africa met the new today. One of the most powerful figures of the apartheid era was in the dock before a black magistrate. The man once called the Great Crocodile is 82 now, but he arrived at court in defiant mood with a new fiancée, nearly half his age, on his arm. P.W. Botha's 11-year rule here still stirs bitter memories. Protesters from the ANC gathered outside to demand justice for those who were killed during the apartheid era.
Today we want to see P.W. Botha, he must go to jail.
There was tight security. The courthouse was surrounded by barbed wire and armed police. Among the crowd, a handful of right-wingers, but Mr Botha had discouraged a mass display of support. The man now facing trial led South Africa during one of its most repressive periods. But the chairman of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, says he does not want a witch hunt.
We were not seeking the truth to use it for the purposes of prosecution. We were wanting to find out the truth for the purposes of healing.
But the threat of a 2-year sentence for contempt did not weaken Mr Botha's resolve today. He will not be saying sorry.
Why do you want me to go and apologize before Bishop Tutu? For what? For what?
South Africa has already gone some way towards healing the wounds of the past, but many feel that process won't be complete until P.W. Botha is called to account. Tim Ewart, ITN, in the Southern Cape.
Some news just in. The security forces
Wide tonight. The film, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and the British actress Kate Winslet, took nearly $100 million in its first 17 days on release in America. So how will it go down here? Well, joining us now is Leslie Felperin, the deputy editor of the venerable film magazine Sight and Sound. Leslie, I suppose a cynic might say that the thing lasts more than 3 hours and we know the outcome, so why go to see it?
Well, I suppose there's always the curiosity, as with any kind of disaster movie, of seeing who's going to survive and who's going to get killed. So I suppose that's part of the appeal of the film. And also I think people want to see just whether or not it's worth $200 million or pounds, whether or not it's, which is even more actually when you factor in marketing costs. But in my opinion, I don't think it's really worth it.
I mean, the whole thing, you said the interest is in who's going to survive. In fact, as I gather, the attention is very much focused on just the two central characters, these two young people. Yeah. Do they manage to carry the film off?
I don't think so. I think it's quite weak, actually, the love story. And I think one of the central faults of the film is that, regardless of the fact they've spent so much money getting things like the China-wear pattern right and the look of the dresses, the only screenwriter who's credited for the film is James Cameron himself, and he certainly doesn't know how to write period dialogue. So it's very unconvincing, the love story. I mean, the real kind of pleasure of the film kicks in when you get to see the special effects, the really big scenes, the ship going down itself. The actual central kind of human relationships, I think, are weak. The best bits of the film are very small little parts put in by character actors like Bernard Hill, who plays the captain of the Titanic, who's very poignant in the scene where he finally is killed in his little nest.
Now, everybody's looking ahead to the Oscars and saying that this is where the film is going to reap its reward, but do you think there's a sense in which the industry really needs it to pick up Oscars in order to justify the fantastic amount of money that was spent? I read somewhere that 2 large film groups have their whole sort of stake riding on this thing.
Well, definitely. And I think the industry has been very worried about the success with which independent films have met with at the Oscars in recent years, films like Pulp Fiction and Fargo. And you know, this is their chance to really pull back with something that's big and spectacular, and they can show how much investment can pay off in the long run. So I wouldn't be surprised. It's won so many Golden Globes. That's always a good indication that it's likely to go on to win Best Picture, as sad as that may be.
Leslie Felprin, thanks very much for those honest opinions. Well, on tonight's News at 10, there'll be a special report on the making of the film and on the return of the epic movie, what that means for low-budget British films, and of course tonight's premiere.
And the main headline